Hey everybody, my name is Ian. I work at the Fort Worth Public Library, and today we are going to be doing the Maker Showcase. Remember that the Maker Showcase happens every second Saturday of the month, and we focus in on a new maker each month. I'm super excited to talk to Ben, who is a quilter fiber artist. I'm going to let him talk a little bit more about what he does, but I want to say hello to Ben.
Hello.
Thanks for joining me today. I'm so excited for another quilter fiber artist. I was kind of tripping over myself because I wasn't exactly sure to what exactly you wanted to call yourself. So I'm going to let you take the reins and tell me what you do.
Sure. I think we can just say for right now that I'm a quilter. I do have, I do knit a little bit, and that's kind of where I started getting into all of this. But I think for right now, we can just call me a quilter because that's primarily what I work in.
Excellent. Okay, cool. So as a first of all, it's always exciting for one quilter to talk to another because it's just so much fun to talk about our craft. But let's really begin at the beginning. How in the world did you get involved? You mentioned that you took on another kind of craft first, but let's start at the beginning. What got you into quilting and fiber art?
I would probably say that, so my, I know a lot of people talk about their grandmothers who knitted and quilted and all of this, but it was my grandmother who was primarily the person who would whenever we'd have family activities, she would have her bag of knitting, and she was also the one who had all of her she had her quilting room, her sewing room that just was overfilled with fabric. And every for each of the grandchildren, she would make a quilt. And so um, when I was in grad school, I started knitting just to have something to do. And about that same time, I started having a few nieces and nephews show up. They were being born, and I wanted to have a gift for them. So I would knit something, but knitting always took longer than I wanted it to. So at some point, I thought I need to do something different. I think it was probably there was a tight timeline when they were born, and I wanted to get something to them right away. So I like I will try I will try quilting and see how that goes. Um, and after that, I basically put away the needles and just went all in on quilting. It was I really enjoyed a lot of the designing aspect of quilting, and that I could get a final product a little faster than knitting, and maybe a little cheaper too. With it probably is a wash, but it anyway. It seemed to go a little faster with the quilting.
Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing how quick it some quilts are super fast to come together and others take a long time. So it really just depends, I guess. Sometimes a quilt that I think is going to go really, really quickly ends up not going together as quickly as I thought it was going to.
Yeah, and fortunately, the baby quilts are smaller, and so to get something the same size as like a knitted blanket that I was doing, it was just a lot faster to do the quilt and to be done with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, is quilting and design your main job, or is this a hobby for you?
This is very much a hobby. I am a I work I work in I work in information management in for an ag company that's here in Des Moines, Iowa. Um, I'm in Des Moines, and the so my day to day is talking with corn breeders and talking with software developers and making sure that the developers are getting the software that the corn breeders need. So this craft quilt art is very much a hobby. Um, I I did start undergrad as an art major. I went a year and changed my mind. I was like, I enjoy this, but I honestly I thought I could make more money and support myself. I thought I could support myself better as a scientist and went into biology, then went to grad school for plant pathology, which is the study of plant diseases, and studied potatoes and the disease that caused the Irish potato famine. Started working with this ag company, and then along the line, along with the knitting, I thought I needed something outside of work to do something creatively, and so that's kind of where the quilting kind of picked up too.
My goodness, it seems like you have taken an interesting path from beginning to end in school, and an odd mix of things. That's really cool though. It's very interesting to hear the path that people take and where they end up. Now, do you find that, I mean, obviously quilting and your job don't exactly align, but I'm sure there's got to be a small little overlap somewhere.
I think a lot of it is that, I mean, part of my day job is it's not exactly project management, but there is some project management there. And so it's the trying to keep things in order, which has worked well with quilting. But at the same time, I am really interested in the user experience and the UI of the software. And so that creative side, the design side from the quilting, I mean, that primarily comes out in the quilting. I can also use a little bit at work to at least make things a little bit better looking than what they had been there.
Well, there's got to be an element of like, as you're working on a quilt, you're wondering and you're thinking about what other people are going to think about, or whenever they look at your quilt, what that UI in a way is going to do for them, and what they're going to feel whenever they look at it, right?
Yeah, that it, especially since the quilt started out as gifts for my nieces and nephews, and then for other people. um, i I do want to make sure that it's something that quilt is something that it can be meaningful to them, or something that they actually want to look at, and something that they want to use. So I do I do really like playing with how colors interact, and so that um, people want to look at them and really study and interact with how the quilts are put together.
Yeah, definitely. Such an important thing about quilting. What is how would you kind of describe your aesthetic? I have seen obviously some of your work, which is, in my opinion, super amazing. And I love all the different designs that you do. But tell our audience a little bit about what your aesthetic is, because there's different types of quilting and different types of design. So what would you consider your style?
I think my style is more um, bold colors and geometric graphic designs. Um, if I move just a little bit, there are some of the designs that I've worked on that have different shapes, like these orange peels. And there's some orange peels up here that are more broken apart. Um, but as you can see, maybe not the top one as much, but the others are all really bright colors. Um, and I really like working with solid fabrics, that or fabrics that might have a faint print, or like a design that doesn't necessarily read as a design. It's more reads more as a solid. Um, I think more I like working with those, because then it's the design of the quilt that really draws the attention, rather than necessarily the prints and the design of the fabric. Which is not to say that there aren't awesome fabrics out there, because there are some really awesome designs out there. Um, and so if I do use those use fabrics that have interesting designs on them, I try to feature them in some way, so that they can stand out. I don't think this one happens to have stripes on the fabric. And so when I was working on some of these courthouse steps blocks, is what these are, I tried to have, also with these stripes, they go from wider to narrower as they go left to right. So as I was using these strips for each of these steps, I tried to keep the fabrics going in the same direction, like at the top of the block, and then in the other direction on the bottom of the block, so that your eye was kind of going around the circle, because like the vertical ones are also have that. So it's, anyway, trying to work with the designs of the fabric if I use printed fabric, just to enhance the design of the quilt that I'm working on. And I kind of skipped over it, but I would say I fall very solidly in the modern quilt area. I appreciate the work that's done in the traditional quilting space. And I do like using some of the blocks, like this courthouse steps is a very traditional block, and the orange peels, but trying to do something a little different with them. These are different size of the orange peels, just to bring a little more modern aesthetic to, which is everything else in my life is the modern aesthetic. And so why wouldn't I do that in my quilting also?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk a little bit for our viewers who may not know what the difference between kind of traditional quilting and modern quilting is. Can you kind of give us a better idea about that?
That is an excellent question. That every person that you ask is going to have a different answer. How I consider modern quilting is that there's a strong this, there is a strong graphic aspect to the quilt, more minimal, lots there is more white space or more negative space, and the fabrics and the colors that are used are, well, they're brighter, and traditional uses a lot of more browns. And if you think of the quilts that might have been on your bed, or if you go to like a museum, you might see older quilts. Those are traditional, not just because they're older, but that's the style. And there's a lot of the modern aesthetic pulled from like mid-century modern architecture and graphic design that is brought into the quilting space. So it's more, yeah, like bolder designs and colors, different layouts. So even like this courthouse step, there are modern quilts where you maybe just even take that one block, make it huge, and that's the quilt.
Yeah, and that's the best part. I love asking that question to modern quilters, because being a modern quilter myself, I'm like, well, let's see what everybody else thinks of this, and let's see what everybody else's definition is, because you're right, there really isn't quite a textbook definition of what makes a modern quilter. So it's always interesting to hear what other people have to say about it. Now, you've designed a couple of patterns as well, if I remember correctly. You've designed some patterns. What kind of gives you inspiration for patterns, and how do you go about designing them?
That's a really good question. A lot of the at least the designs for the patterns are designs that for quilts that I wanted to make. And so like actually this one and this one there are patterns for, and they were quilts that I wanted to make. And there are people that, hey, I want to know how to make that one. So I just translated that for a quilt. There is one quilt that's not back here, but it uses just vertical lines and an arrow type shape. That really, that one I wanted to just use 5 colors and see how I could make a quilt with as few cuts as possible. And so this was taking 5 strips of fabric, sewing them all together into one long strip, then cutting at an angle and rotating some of the pieces around so that it was, I wanted to see how simple and how few seams I could do within this quilt. And I really loved how it turned out. And like it's some ideas like that of, I want to try something else. I want to try something that maybe I haven't seen other people do, or I have this idea that I could make with just a whole bunch of small blocks. But what if I didn't have so many seams? How could I put that together?
Yeah, and I think I know which one you're talking about. I've seen that one, and I love the fact that depending on the colors you choose for it, it can be a completely different quilt. They can be the same exact pattern, but the colors make such a difference in it that they look and feel completely different. I'm getting tongue-tied here as I talk about it, but it feels completely different looking at maybe warmer tones compared to cooler tones.
That's right. Yeah.
It's really awesome. It's very cool. So what are some of your inspirations for quilting in general? Not just your patterns, but just quilting in general. Do you have specific people that inspire you? Or is there certain, obviously modern kind of inspires you, but who or what kind of inspires you, I guess?
Sure. So I think there are some, I have this little cohort of people on Instagram that I follow that I'm really inspired by the way that they quilt and the ideas that they use to do quilts that are a little different, and things that I haven't usually seen before. I think other things that have inspired me are just looking at modern, at mid-century modern type of designs, and there's just pointing at another thing behind me. This little thing is a set of, it's really hard to see, but I was really inspired by a trip to Palm Springs and seeing the different breeze blocks, that all the different designs that are there that came from that same mid-century time of from that same sort of century, that those same decades, and wanted to see how I could incorporate, translate how I wanted to see how I could translate those into fabric with different piecing techniques. So I think there's not one or even a handful of people, or just all sorts of different color combinations that I see that people use, and just, even though I may not use that exact one, but just thinking through how they might have thought about coming up with those particular colors, seeing if I could use that same concept with other pairs of, or groupings of colors.
Yeah, definitely. I'm always surprised looking around me either on vacation or when we could go on vacations and going to different places and everything. It's amazing how inspiration can strike you when you least expect it. I know several people, not just quilters, but just any artist in general who, take pictures of where they're at, or they'll stop mid-step because they see something amazing and they'll take a photo of it, and then they'll use that whenever they take it back home to either draw or paint or quilt, or who knows, it's a lot of different inspiration sources, really. So it's pretty awesome that it's really important, I think, for our viewers to take a moment and look around, and usually you'll find something that inspires you no matter what. So, as someone who quilts, I kind of know what it takes to get started, but I'm very interested to hear what you have to say. What do you feel is important for somebody who wants to get started in quilting? Obviously, the machines and everything can get really expensive, so maybe not those expensive things at first, but what can somebody do to get started?
What I how I started was I saw a sale on a just a basic Singer sewing machine. So it was something that I knew that I could use for making clothes, for doing, if I needed to sew something, it's the machine that I could use. It was just, it was I think it was $250. So it's, I know that can be still a chunk of money. Um, but it was also a machine that I knew if I needed to hem my pants, I could do that. If I needed to reattach a button with a machine instead of by hand, for some reason, if I wanted to do that, I could do that with that machine. Um, if there were other, if I needed to make curtains, I knew that this machine would work. So I took the approach of getting a machine that could be used for all of these things. Um, the so the throat of the machine, which is the space between the needle and the side of the sewing machine. Um, if you really want to quilt and all you want to care about is quilting, you would want to get a machine that has more space there so that as you are running your machine or running your quilt through the machine, you have lots of space and are not wrestling the machine, or you are not wrestling the quilt through the machine. But for sewing pieces together and all of this, it was a really good basic machine to be able to do that. I think I would say the other thing that you could do is don't worry about what the rules are, or worry about what sort of fabric you're supposed to use. There are some suggestions so that your products actually turn out nice, and usable. But something that you could do is, if you have extra shirts, like extra woven not t-shirts, if you have extra like button down shirts, or if you go to a thrift store and there is a shirt or something that you really like the fabric of, you don't have to go to the fabric store, you can use those. And or if there are, say, sheets, cotton sheets with a high thread count, you can use those too. So I guess I would say get a workable a sewing machine that works. um, get some of the needles for it and some thread, probably 50 weight thread that you could get at Joann, or your local quilting shop. It can be polyester thread. It doesn't have to be cotton. There are people that will say it absolutely has to be cotton. It does not absolutely have to be cotton. And usually that sort of thread will be a little cheaper, the polyester thread. So that's good to save some money there. And just probably a basic rotary cutter, like this, that has a round blade so you can cut the fabric, and a pressing mat, I mean a cutting mat that you can use the rotary cutter on, so you can have nice lines, and probably a ruler. Let me pull my favorite one. It's a 2.5 inch by 12.5 inch, really basic ruler, but I've used this, I think, since I started quilting 10 years ago. So there is a bit of an upfront investment, but these tools you can continue to use. And then as you spend time and are really get more excited about quilting and the process, you can keep working with that same sewing machine. You can also upgrade to other machines. The machine that I have now is an Alnita EF1. That this machine is a straight stitch. So some of the basic machines that you might get can do zigzags and do different, have like 20 to 200 different stitch types. This one only does straight, which is really nice for doing straight line quilting and for piecing. It's also a lot faster, so which is not something that you need to have, but as you get more committed to the craft, you can upgrading is an option. You absolutely do not have to, and there are some fantastic quilters and sewers who use just those entry level machines, and they are still really successful.
Absolutely. And there's some that even don't use a machine. They are hand quilters and hand sewers, which I'm like, give me a machine any day. I don't like to do that by hand. But there are some people out there who do complete their quilts completely by hand. So you don't always have to have that machine to do it, but it definitely makes it a little bit easier and nicer on the fingers as well, for sure.
Absolutely.
Well, awesome. So an amazing, and of course you can always get books from the library as well. Check out those books if you're interested in quilting or want to learn more about quilting. There's always new and great titles coming out, and we of course have those at the Fuller Public Library as well. Ben, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. Where can people find you online?
The primary place that you can find me is Instagram. My handle is at Ben Millett, BenMillett. I also have my website, benmillett.us. I have a blog there where I talk about all of my finished products and have some tutorials of different quilts and even totes that you can make.
Awesome. Well, I hope everybody takes the time to visit your website and check out your Instagram. I follow him on Instagram, and guys, let me tell you, it's pretty awesome. He's a pretty big deal in my book. I'll put it that way. Thank you, Ben. Really appreciate it, and thank you all for joining me today. And we'll see you next time on the Maker Showcase. Bye, everyone.